question in connection with the first question is more or less the same, so I should not repeat what was said in the first question. I just told a paper where one Norwegian, he mentioned again the same thing that Willard has said, but then he says Jewish historians have, since the archives was opened in the 80s, very unanimous told us what happened. Palestinian was in large numbers, or for the most part, by force and terror driven out of Israel. But what he says is that most Israeli historians they say it is unanimous. So my question is, are you the only one historian who say they were not driven out by force, but as a result of war? Are you the only one? Is the majority on the other side?
No. Firstly, the subject hasn't been studied by many historians. It was taboo, basically, among the Zionists in Israel until the 1980s, so nobody touched the subject, or almost nobody wrote anything about it, and the documents were closed, so it was impossible to write about it honestly. But it's also true that since then, not that many people have studied the material. What I would say is, though, that the vast majority of Israeli historians and historians of Israel, I think, more or less accept my description of what happened. Something which was complex, spaced over time, and I think most, except Arab historians or so-called historians, would accept that there was no master plan in what happened to the Palestinians who were displaced, and there was no systematic implementation of a plan. Exceptions to this are Ilan Pappe, who did write a book called The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, recently published. Essentially, it's one big lie, in my view. Its sources are suspect, incorrect, distorted, invented in part. I can tell you, I'll give you one example just so that you know what I'm talking about. On one of the pages there, in Ilan Pappe's Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, he quotes an entry in Ben Gurion's diary from February 1948, in which Ben Gurion wrote a comprehensive diary every day, usually of what people told him. In other words, he didn't write what he's thinking or saying, but people used to come to him and report the battlefield, the political front, the international front, and he used to report what they said in his diary. So comes to him a scientist who actually died a week ago or something, a man called Katsir, or his brother, one of the two Katsir brothers, comes to him, who worked in the military, the Haganah's scientific arm. They had a science department. And Katsir reports to him, we have just experimented with dogs, and we're talking about a gas. We've just experimented with dogs. The experiment has been successful. The dogs were dazzled or temporarily blinded. The word in Hebrew is sunviru. For 24 hours, Ben Gurion writes in the diary, for 24 hours. In other words, it affected the dog's sight for 24 hours, this experiment, with whatever, some sort of tear gas of some sort. Ilan Pappe quotes the diary entry, and he writes, the way he translates Ben Gurion is written in Hebrew, the diary. He writes, the science, Katsir came to me, said the experiment with the dogs was successful, the dogs were blinded. Period. No 24 hours, no, and uses the Hebrew word, not sunveru, but uvru. In other words, there is a special Hebrew word for blinded, not for temporarily dazzled. Like when car lights flash in your eyes, you use the word sunveru, which is what Ben Gurion used. In other words, he mistranslates the Ben Gurion quote to make a point which is not true, and of course to blacken Israel's image. The Jews were busy trying to produce gases, or producing gases in 48, and he doesn't tell anybody anywhere in the book that gases were never used in 48, so it doesn't even matter what was actually being experimented with, because gas was never used in the 48 war. But for dog lovers, this sounds pretty awful. You blinded dogs and so on, and this isn't what Ben Gurion wrote. So that's the nature of Pappe's modus operandi in the book throughout. On everything, you cannot rely on one sentence in that book, or any quote.
Then we